All right, we are live. Good morning, everybody. I am Vino Duraisamy. I am a Snowflake developer advocate. And in this episode, we're going to talk all about Snowpark Migration Accelerator. Well, what is this? Snowpark Migration Accelerator, and then how can you get started if you are a Snowflake developer? Well, to answer all of your questions and to tell us all more about the Snowpark Migration Accelerator, I have with me today Brandon, who is the product manager for SMA. And firstly, welcome to the show, Brandon. We're excited to
Thank,
have
thank you, Vino. Happy to be here.
you. And can you tell us a bit about what you do at Snowflake? I know you
Sh-
told your team the Snowpark Migration.
sh- yeah, sure. I work with our Snowpark product team and work specifically with our migration accelerators, so our kind of tools and ecosystem around Snowpark to make it easier to use Snowpark. So that's what I do.
Fantastic. And I know that in today's episode, we're going to go beyond the basics to learn about specific features for automated code conversion process. And we also heard that there's going to be a sneak peek of this recently launched feature that we're going to talk about briefly.
Yes, we're gonna try to show all that, and then as part of an end-to-end migration. So a whole pipeline we're gonna try to migrate in this episode today, and use some of the testing library that we've kind of just released for Snowpark.
Awesome. Okay. I think before we get started, let's maybe quickly look at what the format of the session looks like for folks who are tuning in. We're going to start off with a brief introduction to what Snowpark Migration Accelerator is, and I guess dive into a deep, cool demo that Brandon has. And then we'll get to your questions in the end. So feel free to pop in your questions in the comments if you want to. And over to you, Brandon. Let's tell us about.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I don't know if you can see my screen or if I need to do anything to see my screen, but I have a couple of quick slides that I put together, hopefully 5 minutes or less on the slides. Just a quick overview of when we talk about migration to Snowflake, we understand that there's a lot of things that you do in a migration. The acceleration tools I'm going to show today are just a part of that. They're just a small piece of that. But when you look at the entire scope of what you need to do in a migration, it starts with planning and design, and then you're going to do a lot of conversion, a lot of data movement, making everything work together before finally running it at the end. I'm going to walk through the code conversion and the data ingestion, data validation pieces. So kind of the last three on the top. But I like to tell people not to worry about all these steps. It really boils down into three things, like let's figure out what we have, let's make it work in Snowflake, and then test that it's working. And that's what we're going to do today, is see what we've got, make it work, and validate that it's working.
Gotcha. And before we dive into what exactly SMA is and how we could do this code conversion, maybe for those of us who are new to the ecosystem, can you talk about what exactly is Snowpark and why would I want to migrate to Snowpark?
Yeah. I mean, I could spend the whole session on this, but to keep it short, Snowpark is basically a way to use your old Spark pipelines or to write code in your preferred language using Snowflake. So if you kind of work your way through this slide, you can work with whatever environment you want to. I'm going to spend time in VS Code today and in the Snowflake editor, but you can use any editor that you'd like. I'm also going to, if we have time, I'll migrate a notebook. I'm not sure we'll have time, but that would, I'll show the Jupyter environment as well. And I'll be working mainly with Snowpark data frames, but you can run your code in a variety of ways using the Snowpark API, using pandas, using UDFs or stored procedures. And there's a lot of capabilities that have been built into Snowpark, particularly with the ability to manage any package that's available in PyPy. So I will be doing a Python migration, but there's examples out there of Java and Scala migrations that we've done as well. So there's a lot you can do as far as just general development by using Snowpark. I'm going to show a data movement example or a pipeline example today, but Snowpark has a lot of capabilities. And while we'll just show pieces of that today, I hope that the larger audience can understand there's a lot that we can do even beyond what we're going to show today.
And yeah, I think maybe can we talk about what Snowpark is? What does the process look like to use SMA, and what are the components within the tool itself?
Yeah, that's perfect because that's what we're going to be talking about. Most of this session is the Migration Accelerator. This is a free tool that Snowflake makes available for you to use to both assess and in some cases convert your code bases. So if you have Spark code or really you have any Python or Scala code, the Snowpark Migration Accelerator can analyze that and tell you what sort of third-party packages you're using, what kind of references to the Spark API you have, any inputs and outputs that you may have as well. So for example, if you have some, let's say some notebooks, Jupyter notebooks, and they're written in both SQL and Python, the SMA can tell you what references are happening between the two, what dependencies are present for that notebook. So if I need some third-party packages I need to bring into my environment, it'll tell me that. It'll tell me if there's SQL dependencies present for my Python code, meaning if I have references to SQL objects. So that assessment capability is the real value in the SMA. And then in some cases, it can convert references of the Spark API to the Snowpark API. And I'll show a little bit of that today. It's important to know it's not just the regex tool. This is building a semantic model to analyze what's happening in the source code so that we can replicate it over into Snowflake. That's primarily what I'm going to show. I'll briefly show Snowpark checkpoints, which is a library within the Snowpark library that allows you to test any data frame or do a comparison between a Spark data frame and a Snowpark data frame. So I'll briefly touch on that here at the end of this session when we talk about validation.
Perfect. I think now that we know all about these accelerators and also how we could use this assessment library in the end, maybe see them in action. I know you have to do a demo. You're excited to see what that looks like.
Yeah, so let's do a demo. So let me show you, let me give everyone some context here. This demo is actually part of a quick start that is available, and I think we have the link for it at the end of the presentation, so we'll share this link out at the when I'm done here. But I'm going to be, this is part of a larger quick start that shows a full migration from SQL Server and Spark over to Snowflake. I'll only be doing the Spark part, so I'll actually be starting here on section 6 and continuing through section 7. If there's time, we'll go on to section 8. If there's not time, fear not. It's right here in the quick start. So everything that I'm going to be walking through is available for you to walk through as part of this quick start. I would strongly urge you to start from step 1, of course, because the data that we're going to be working with has, in this scenario, already been migrated over using a different tool called SnowConvert AI. SnowConvert AI and the Snowpark Migration Accelerator are sister tools. SnowConvert AI works mainly on SQL migration, whereas the Snowpark Migration Accelerator focuses on data frame and a Spark API migration. So in this demo I'm going to show you, we've already run through a SQL Server migration. So we migrated the AdventureWorks database into Snowflake. And now I'm going to build the pipeline, the Spark pipeline that we have for that database. I'm going to move it over into Snowflake using Snowpark. And we also have a notebook that we could migrate as well. The code files for this are also available in the quick start. So I'll just boringly show a window here. Actually, I guess I'll pull up the VS Code. These code files are in a zip file that's linked from the quick start that I just mentioned. So there's a basic reporting notebook and there's a basic pipeline that was reading from SQL Server using Spark to do some transformational logic and then writing, oh, I'm sorry, this is reading from a local file. Let me clarify that. The example that we have here is a old point of sale system that is saving things to a local repository that is then pulled by Spark into SQL Server. So in this example, we've already migrated from SQL Server into Snowflake, and now we want to migrate that Spark code that was pulling from the local repository into SQL Server, and now make it pull from the local repository into Snowflake using Snowpark. So that's the migration that we're going to do. And to do this migration, we're going to use the Snowpark Migration Accelerator. So if we go back to my slides, there'll be a link here for downloading it. That'll take you to this page on Snowflake's website. This is a local application that you can download no matter your OS. You can choose it here. I have already downloaded. Shockingly enough, I have already downloaded and opened it. And I am going to probably move a little quickly, a little fast here because this is a demo, but I'll reiterate for the last time that this is part of a larger quick start, and you can follow along in the quick start. If you can't quite follow along here, you can follow along in the quick start. So when I first launched the SMA, I'm going to create a new project file. This is a project file that's going to save all of the information for my migration. So I'll call this July demo because it's July and I'm doing a demo. And I have this code saved on my desktop here in this today's date with the Spark only version of the migration. If I go back to VS Code, you'll see that's the same window that I have here, this today's date Spark only, because I'm not doing the SQL Server part of this demo today. And I'm going to choose the source code folder as the folder that I want to migrate here. And again, that's this folder right here that I'm choosing, which has the notebook. It has the the pipeline file, Python script, and it has some data. This is a sample of the data that is being pulled from, in our scenario, from the local point of sale system into what was SQL Server, now being pulled into Snowflake. If I have SQL that I was migrating, I could choose a source language. The SMA does analyze and convert some SQL dialects. These are a subset of what can be done with Snow Convert AI. So if you have a large SQL warehouse and you are migrating it, for example, if you had a SQL Server warehouse that we have already migrated in this example over to Snowflake, you can use Snow Convert AI for that. Some of those SQL dialects that are commonly embedded in Python and Scala code are available here. I actually don't have any SQL here, but I'll choose Spark SQL. Normally I do an assessment. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the assessment. One of my things you should always do at the end of this presentation will be always do the assessment, but for time, I'm going to skip it here. And note that there are some settings I can affect, including what kind of testing I want to do through the checkpoints library, which I'll leave all these settings as the default right now, but note that when I talk about validation at the end, there are some settings you can change before you run your conversion that will kind of affect where checkpoints could be inserted. More on that later.
Mm-hmm.
So all I've done is choose a local input directory that has code files in it. And I've created a project file so that I can keep track of my migration status. And now I've told the tool to convert what's in that local directory. Now it is also going to generate the complete assessment information as well. So if I were to have not skipped the assessment part, I would still get this same kind of assessment information. There's always going to be a series of readiness scores that are generated. These readiness scores are designed to tell you how compatible your code base is with Snowpark or Snowflake in general. So for example, here I'm about 98% compatible with the Spark API on this particular code base, meaning there's only a couple references to the Spark API I need to look at. It looks like my third-party libraries are fully compatible. I don't even need to import from PyPy on any of these. And I actually didn't have any SQL statements here. These readiness scores are actually changing, not all the time, but fairly often. There may be an additional one added or one subtracted, just to give you more information on the level of readiness that you have across your workload. There's also a section to let you know how much of your code was fully parsed by the tool. Oh, 50%, that's tragic. This just means that I had two files and there was one thing in one of those files that was not able to be parsed. So one of my files needs to be examined. So we'll do that here in a second. And that's kind of the basic overview on reading the scores. You really want to make sure you understand what those are. If any one of these numbers were low, or you saw a red X here, when you expand the menu, it'll tell you a little bit more about what you should do. In this scenario, I'm pretty compatible, so there's not a lot of concern. I can go ahead and move forward.
So Brandon, before we go further, I see that this is like a two-step process. First is I give the input, folder where I have my source code, and then I also point to an output directory where I want to convert it to here. And then first step is to actually run the assessment to see what I'm dealing with here in the source code. And the second step is the actual conversion. And I guess in the interest of time, we didn't want to run the assessment itself. But for folks who are watching, can you maybe talk a bit more about what kind of assessment data that it generate, or like what should I look out for in the assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you run the assessment, essentially you're getting the same reporting output as you do when you run conversion. You're just not getting the converted code. So if I were to click here on View Reports, it would open a local directory where all of this information was saved. In fact, if I go back to my VS Code window, I'll see now that there is an output directory. This was created by the SMA. If I open the reports folder, this is the exact same set of reports that I'm looking at here. So the reason why we generally tell you to do the assessment is because, as you can see here, there's quite a few files. And all of these files are giving you a level of compatibility, or giving you a little more insight into how compatible or what you might need to pay attention to in your migration. Now the tool will point you in a direction. So the assessment output will look very similar to this. And if you see a red X here, then in the what to do next, it'll tell you, hey, why don't you take a closer look at this report, at report X or report Y, so you can better understand why you may not have a good score for a particular section. In this example, we don't have a lot to be concerned about. But for example, if I had an issue in my third-party libraries, or I had a lot of third-party libraries that were not supported, I may want to check my dependency inventory, which looks like this, which will tell me that in whichever file I have, again, I only have 2 code files in this example. I had a notebook and I had a script file. The script file, by the way, is what we're looking at here on the VS Code window there. But if I had more files, I could pivot this by file type. It'll tell me what kind of dependencies I have. And if I had third-party libraries where there was not at least it wasn't already available in Snowflake, then the SMA would give you some instructions on how to make sure those are pip installed in your environment so you have access to them, to take advantage of the artifact repository that I think we mentioned earlier in one of the slides. So that's kind of why we tell you to run the assessment, is because before you get into the migrated code, before you dive into the converted code, it is very helpful to understand what you need to actually run this converted code. And another great example is the Spark usages inventory. I said I wasn't going to spend time on the assessment. I'm totally spending time on the assessment. The assessment is more important. If I look at my Spark usages inventory, that'll again be sorted by file. So I just have 2 files here, but it's going to tell me which of my references to the Spark API are completely supported. So what we would do is we would take the file IDs and we would look at the supported references to the Spark API. We would look at the dependencies, either on SQL, there's a dependent on an input source here, there's a CSV file, which makes sense. In the example I said, we were pulling from a local file and we were writing to SQL Server in the source code. This is telling me that I'm pulling from a local file here. It would give me all that information. So I'm better set up to understand how to run my code in Snowflake, as opposed to just converting it straight away and then going through the issues and working through them. And then I don't really know where I need to start. I don't know how to select a POC. You can use this dependency inventory to select a POC if you have a large code base. And that's why we generally tell you to run the assessment, is it gives you the right tools to understand what's in your code base Again, with 2 code files, probably not the most critical thing, but when you have thousands and thousands of pipeline files or notebook files, it's extremely helpful to understand what you have and where you should start. And that's why we tell you to run the assessment, generally speaking.
Gotcha. And before I even get to the assessment stage, is there some sort of prep work that I need to do with the existing source code, or is there not?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So, sort of, not really. If you're running code files through the SMA, just note what code files it actually supports. These are Python files and Scala files and SQL files. So any, but you may not have those all in the same place. Like for example, if you have, let's say you're doing a Hive or Hadoop migration and you have HQL somewhere, Hive SQL somewhere, you want to extract that or export that into .htql or .sql files, and then put them in the same directory with your .py, Python, .ipynb notebook files, whatever you may have. You want to put them all in the same directory, because when the SMA builds affectionately referred to as the SMA, the Snowpark Migration Accelerator, you can see that abbreviation there. It builds a semantic model of everything in the code base. So the more code you have, even if it's cross-language, even if you have notebooks that have dependencies on Python files, on Scala files, on SQL, it's good to get it all in the same directory so that when that semantic model is built, there's fewer missing things. So in your artifact dependency repo, you'll have fewer failures because it'll understand that, oh, okay, there's a reference to another file. Oh, that file was included. I know what's in that file. So this is not a missing reference, and it can resolve more of those dependencies faster. So that's my main consideration, is make sure you're running the right files through. If there are issues in those files, the tool will tell you that. It'll say, you know, hey, I couldn't analyze a bunch of your code because of whatever reason. And then you can work through why that might be the case. But the key consideration is to make sure you have the right types of files there. Even if you're not sure if you have everything, the tool will tell you in that dependency inventory, it'll tell you if you have missing references. So if there's a function from a Python script that's not present in your scanned code base, it will tell you that, and you can go find that function.
Gotcha. I think this is very cool, and also sorry for taking you on a side quest
on
assessment reports. But then I think another question probably is about how do we actually look at and run the code that we generated? Maybe if you
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the critical part that I want to address here, because when you look at the output code, again, so in this output directory, I have that reports folder I was kind of showing you through. And again, a whole bunch of files there. We could go into all of them, but we won't for right now. And then this is the project file that I created. If you recall in the tool, I created something called July demo. And if we look at the output code, we're going to see some changes here. So if I compare the source and the target side by side. So this is the original Spark code here, which is fairly obvious. There's imports from PySpark. And you can see that those have been converted over to Snowpark. Looks like something changed in our session call here. There's a read from a data source here as well. There are EWIs inserted into the output code. This is when the tool detects that there may be an error, there may be an issue with something. Again, not to harp too much on the value of the reports, but if we look at the issue CSV, looks like I already have the issue CSV open. Let's reopen it just so there's no smoke and mirrors here. This file is going to inventory every issue that I had. So every instance where the tool inserts an EWI, which is an error, a warning, or an issue, it will give you a specific code for that error. That will be inventoried and shown to you at the bottom of the application here. And it will also be shown to you in the CSV report I was just showing here. So for example, which file are we in? We're in not the notebook file, but in the regular Python file. It's telling me that I have an issue reported on line 67 of the source code, so it could be a slightly different than the line number could be slightly different. And that's just a warning, and it's telling me that there could be a parameter mismatch between Spark and Snowpark. So we need to take a look at this when we do our testing. And then it also will give you conversion errors, which are things the tool could not convert, and parsing errors, which are the things the tool could not understand. In fact, that's where we always want to start with any parsing errors. So I have one on line 131 of the source code here. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, by the way, the EW I was pointing at earlier is here, which is in line 60 something of the source code. And then here,
All right. I think we saw a cool demo. Firstly, I think there was a technical issue on our end and the demo sort of dropped. But then, hey, firstly, we almost saw through the end of the demo. What did we see? Firstly, there are two steps if we want to convert your existing Spark code into a Snowpark code, which is use the Snowpark Migration Accelerator. It's like main two-step process to summarize. Hey, Brandon, long time
hey,
no see.
I'm back. I'm sorry I disappeared on you. I was having so much fun.
No, I was going to summarize all that we did so far. I was just talking over how it's a two-step process. First, we need to run the assessment and then get a bunch of cool CSVs that tell you all about what your source code looks like and what do you have to look into, sort of like before you actually do the conversion itself. And second step is run the conversion, and then you would have the converted Snowpark code in your output, the conversion output directory, whatever you pointed it to. And what you were trying to show us was basically side-by-side compare the Spark code and the Snowpark code and see what changed or what stayed. And yeah.
Yes. Yes, so I'm not sure how much time we lost there. Apologize, everyone. I was having too much fun, I guess, and so was my ISP. But
hey,
that is a great summary. And what I was trying to show there is that the tool inserts into the code where exactly you need to make a change. So not only does it summarize it for you in all of the reporting, but it tells you exactly where you need to make a change. And that's what I was highlighting there. So I don't know if we want to keep going with that or go a different direction.
Yeah, I think we're good also because we're at time, but I have like two questions before we wrap up. One, we got the source code in your demo from your local repository, and then we converted it into Snowpark. So how do I now run this Snowpark code into a Snowflake environment?
So that's a great question, and that's one of the most important things we want to do is make sure that you work through your inputs and outputs. So there's four key things you want to do when you're dealing with the output of the tool. The first is you want to work through your issues, and that's what I was showing the side by side when it has an error message next to it. And maybe I can pull up if it's cool. I'm gonna pull up these things that I think you should remember. You want to deal with your issues. So I think we talked earlier about how the input matters, do the assessment, use the data, start with a POC, use the tool to help you build a POC, understand your readiness scores. You want to deal with the issues programmatically. So sort them by issue code across your entire code base, and then work through them. And there are some additional accelerators like the Snowconvert Migration Accelerator, which allows you to call Cortex to generate a prompt to call Cortex on any of the issues and have it recommend solutions for you. And then you need to resolve your session. So make sure your session is available from wherever you're running this code. For example, if you're running it in a different location than when you were before. At the start, we kind of mentioned how you could run this as a UDF. You could run it as a Snowpark file or as a Python file using whatever connection you already have. Just make sure that the session calls are correct. And that's something that will be worked through in that quick start if you go through the quick start. Thirdly is validate your inputs and outputs. So this is what you were talking about. We had a local file here that we were running. So in order to actually access that, we need to create an internal stage that's accessible from that local machine. It would be recommended in that example to change where the output of that point of sale system is putting that file, maybe make it into a cloud location or an external stage. But still, if we just want to get it to work exactly the way it was before, we'd want to turn that local directory into an internal stage. And again, there's code to do this in the quick start, so you can walk through that yourself. And then lastly, we want to do any cleanup. So any things that are no longer necessary, like that we're maybe referencing things in Spark that we didn't need. For example, in that code that I was showing earlier, there's references to a login credentials file that we don't need anymore because we're going to use our Snowpark session. Then you would want to remove those from the code. So those are 4 things you always want to do with your converted code. Work through your issues programmatically, resolve any of your session issues, make sure your session is available and can be run. Make sure your inputs and outputs are all available, and then do any cleanup you want to do.
Awesome. And I think for the folks who are watching, if you could not watch the entire demo, there is a silver lining in all of this, which is we have this entire quick start completely available. And you can also download the Snowpark Migration Accelerator. We have the QR codes for both of them available. So, hey, the world is your oyster. You can go download the SMA and run through the quick start all by yourself. And it's like a detailed step-by-step instruction that walks you through the end-to-end migration process. It's like Spark into Snowpark. And I think the quick start also goes through so much more than just the Spark part. So you even got so much more than what you saw here in the quick start if you go check it out. And one other question we had from another user, I think Sridhar, and it was also probably my follow-up question. When you introduced yourself, you said you're working on a bunch of migration accelerators. So I'm assuming Snowconvert is just one of the accelerators. Snowpark is SMA is one of the accelerators. So what are the different types of source code can we help migrate? And when do we use Snowconvert? When do we use SMA?
Great question. So in general, if you're using Snowconvert AI, you want to, and if you are familiar with Snowconvert, it's now called Snowconvert AI for good reason. You want to use that on any SQL that you may have. You can do it in 2 different ways. You can directly connect to a source SQL database, depending on the database. So in the example that we were working through earlier, that was a SQL Server migration that we had done. You can directly connect to a SQL Server database and not just migrate the code, the logic over, the schema, and get it set up in your new environment. You can also migrate the data as well. Or you can use code as an input, much like we were doing with the Snowpark Migration Accelerator. You can extract or export the entire logic of your database, any DDL files that you may have, even just random queries. If you have random select statements out there, you can extract those all into .sql files and use those as an input for Snowconvert AI. So if you have SQL or if you have a data warehouse or a database that you're looking to migrate over, you want to use Snowconvert AI. And if you have any Python or Scala code at all that you would like to migrate over, whether it has references to the Spark API or not, you should use the Snowpark Migration Accelerator. And that will only take in the code files as an input. But it's important to note that you can include SQL files as an input as well, as long as they're Spark SQL or HiveQL or Databricks SQL, which the Snowpark Migration Accelerator takes as an input, along with the Python and the Scala files.
Gotcha. Okay, I think that's very helpful. And that brings us to the end of the session. Firstly, thanks everybody for watching and thanks for great questions. And Brandon, fantastic demo. And also thanks for taking us on side quests and also showing in depth how to work with the assessment reports and why it is important for us to run the assessments before doing the code conversions themselves. And I hope this was very useful for everybody. Thanks again for showing this.
Thank you, Vino, for carrying us through. I appreciate it.
All right. See you everybody in the next episode. Have a good one.